Kim Leadbeater, I have been wanting to interview you for ages. I'm really thrilled to meet you, actually, because I haven't met you before.
No, well, that's very kind of you, but you do need to get out more.
We're going to talk about the circumstances which led to you becoming the MP for your hometown a little bit later. But can I ask you, had you ever thought about becoming a Member of Parliament?
Probably not in that clearer way of expressing it. I'd always been really interested in politics, and actually at primary school, one of the teachers said, "Oh, Kim Leadbeater, one day you'll be Prime Minister," because I was pretty confident, even at quite a young age. But no, I hadn't. Again, I'd sort of toyed with the idea. I actually started a degree in philosophy and politics when I was about 19, but I never finished it because the timing wasn't right and various other things. So, yeah, I don't think this was the trajectory that I was going down.
And what has been the most unexpected thing about becoming a Member of Parliament?
I think the most challenging things are the difficulty of balancing the job in Westminster and the job in the constituency, because I actually think those are both two full-time jobs. And I think doing both of them well is really challenging if you do them both properly. And the other thing that I find really challenging is the range of subjects and topics which you need to keep in your head. And I find that quite frustrating. I remember someone actually during the by-election, who was an ex-MP, who said to me, "You're like a GP. You have to know a little bit about everything." And I think that's really true, and I really remember those words. And I find that quite hard because I'm actually quite a details person, and I would rather know, right, well, but why has this happened, and what's the background to it, and what's the story to it? And the reality is you can't know that about everything that you're expected to deal with. So those are the two most challenging things. So most of the stuff I don't think is a surprise to me, because I'd got an idea of what the job was like, having seen my sister do it, having seen other people do it, and having spent time in and around Parliament previously.
You've got a long-term partner. She's called Claire. Have you always had relationships with women?
Well, no, interestingly, and I don't think this is particularly in the public domain, but until I met Claire, I'd always had relationships with men. So, and I find this really interesting, actually, because I'm not a big labels person, and we spend a lot of time obsessing about labels. And I think it's also really important how people choose to identify. But I met Claire about 13 years ago now, and we've been together ever since. But prior to that, it wasn't even on my radar to even think about having a relationship with a woman. And I think sometimes that's what happens in life, isn't it? Things that you're not expecting happen, sometimes horrible, sometimes good. Have you experienced
homophobia? Have people treated you differently since you have been with a woman?
Very, very occasionally, I would say. Certainly never experienced homophobia, which I've had friends and colleagues experience on a horrendous scale, and friends and colleagues who came out as gay 10, 20, 30 years ago. I've certainly never experienced any of that. I do think there is a different way of people treating you, but not necessarily in a negative way, just maybe slightly different. I mean, my friends were gobsmacked. So my friends were like, "Oh my God, what's she doing now?" So they were really surprised, but not negative at all. Just like, "Bloody hell, Kim." You know, didn't see that one coming. But no, so I'm very fortunate. And I think that's really important to me as well, to make sure that my experience is my experience, but to understand that that's not everybody's experience. And sadly, we do still see huge amounts of discrimination and homophobia, along with, sadly, lots of other abuse for people just being who they are. And that's an agenda that I'm really keen to sort of do more work on.
I'm going to take you back to June 2016, to the terrible day when your sister Jo Cox was murdered. God, I just got a shiver down my spine actually just saying that, because actually she was my colleague. I remember very clearly where I was when I knew something was wrong. The shock and pain that we went through as her colleagues, that's nothing compared to what you would have gone through. Tell me when you first heard something was wrong.
So I was at home on that day because it was, I think it's the European Football Championship, and we were at home getting ready to watch, I think it was England and Wales. But I'd taken my car in for its MOT at the garage just down the road. So I was trying to keep fit and healthy. So I said to Claire, "I'll jog down, get my car, come back up and we'll watch the football." And then I remember just as I was getting close to the garage, my phone went and it was Jo's husband, basically saying that Jo had been attacked. And what is really weird is that as soon as I heard that, I knew this was not going to be good. And I just knew. And I remember I started shaking, and it's really weird, isn't it, how things have a physical manifestation on you. And I said to the guy at the garage, I said, he could see that I was shaken. And he said, "Are you all right, Kim?" And I said, yeah, I'm fine. I've just had a bit of a worrying phone call. And I said, my sister's the MP and I've just heard some news that she's been attacked. And I said, "Oh, it's Jo Cox, you might have heard of her." And he went, No, Kim, I don't watch the news, it's too depressing. And I remember that conversation really clear. It was a lovely bloke, Steve, at the garage. And then I remember getting in my car, driving home, and then the rest is sort of quite a blur. Haven't revisited it very much. Haven't had any counselling, so let's make sure this doesn't turn into a therapy session. And I guess since that day, have just tried to put one foot in front of the other to keep going, mainly for my parents and mainly for Jo's children, but also, as you say, for everybody else who was affected by Jo's murder, and that's a heck of a lot of people. Colleagues, people in our local area whose lives were changed forever. And just to try and show that when the worst possible things do happen in life, and sadly they do to lots of people, you've somehow got to find a way to carry on. And that, I suppose that's what I've been doing ever since. And that doesn't mean I'd say I'm doing it particularly well, but I've kept going, and I'll continue to do that for as long as I can.
The grieving must be just a constant process. Does it change?
I think grief's really funny, isn't it? Loss is very strange. Grief is very strange. And at the centre of any loss, it's a bit like an onion, isn't it? You've got losing that person, and then you've got the circumstances around that loss. And like I lost my grandparents at ripe old ages of 90s, and that was sad, but it wasn't tragic. And we were all upset, but we weren't devastated. You've then got losing people through illness. You've got losing people through, all sorts of different circumstances. I think murder just gives everything a whole new dimension. And there's lots of other layers around what happened to Jo. Clearly, the political nature of her murder, the fact that it was taking place in a very toxic political environment and culture, the fact that it was news all around the world. So not only were we plunged into a world of loss and grief, but the world's media were on us as a family. Then we'd got the political climate and the situation that was going on there. So there were so many different dimensions. And then we had to go into the legal system, which I got no experience of at all. So suddenly you've got all these new worlds that you're sat in the middle of. And where does your grief sit within that? And I have no idea. And if I'm honest, and I've said this for nearly 7 years now, I haven't grieved. I'm nervous about grieving because as soon as you open that box, you can't put it back in. Does that mean I'll never leave the house? Does that mean, I won't be able to function? What does that grief look like under those circumstances? So I kind of haven't done that. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. And I think everybody's different. I wouldn't have blamed anybody if they'd just locked the door and closed the curtains and said, just leave me alone for the next 5 months, 5 years, however long. But I haven't done that. And I think Jo's children are a big part of that because they will obviously look back going forward about what happened, and I want them to see not just what happened, but I want them to see our response to what happened. And the fact is, as a family and as a community, and actually as a country in some ways, we've tried to do as much positive stuff as we can in Jo's name. And I think that's really, really important. And people do that all the time. I've spoken to other families who've had members murdered and have lost members to illness. And, one of your ways of coping is to do something positive. And I think it does keep you going.
What work could be done? Who should be leading it? What do we need to do?
I think there's lots of layers to it. I think there is the actual physical day-to-day safety of MPs, and a lot has changed in that regard, I would say. There's still more could be done, but a lot has changed. But the broader thing for me, Gloria, is around what our politics looks like, and by default almost what society looks like, and how we conduct ourselves around particularly difficult, contentious issues where we do disagree. And what does that look like so that we can have healthy, robust, passionate debates, but in a civilised and respectful manner? And since being in Parliament, I see some of that done really well, and sometimes I sadly see it done less well. And I think, therefore, as political leaders, we have a responsibility to think about how we conduct ourselves. I think the media have got a responsibility and a role to play in terms of how they can create division and stoke division around contentious areas, or they can choose to be balanced and present, different opinions and a different range of views. And also within that, respecting freedom of speech and respecting freedom of debate and discussion, which is really, really important. But freedom of speech and freedom to have your own opinions is not the same as being offensive or rude or horrible. And that's kind of like, but equally, we've all got our own line as to where that is, haven't we? So that's difficult.
Have you been subject to online abuse?
I've not done too badly since being elected. But I will be honest, part of that is because I don't tend to try and create a particularly high profile for myself. I kind of came into politics thinking I've already got enough people knowing who I am. And I know having a public profile is an important part of being an MP and being in public life, but I have consciously tried not to draw attention to things on occasions. And I've still been subjected to some abuse. I would say nowhere near as much as some colleagues have had, and I've spoken to many colleagues about their experiences, and it's dreadful. But I have had somebody arrested.
Have you?
I have, yeah.
For social media or real life abuse?
This was email. Yeah. I've had very little in real life. In fact, I don't think I've had any. And I think part of that is because when I'm in the constituency, people know me, people know my story, people feel comfortable enough, as they do every week, to come up and chat to me. And, and I take that as a real compliment that people feel able to do that. But some of the things that people have been through, and this is what amazed me when I first came into Parliament, the fact that MPs would read off threats, abuse, online, offline, physical attacks on their officers, and they would read it like it was just a shopping list, or it was just, this, and they'd come to accept it. And I think that's a really dangerous place to be in. But I've kind of found myself almost going into that, area and the way of thinking about it, well, it just comes with a job, but it shouldn't come with a job. It shouldn't come with any job. And that's the other thing is, we see sadly at the minute, we've got an NHS in crisis, we're getting doctors getting abused, we're getting nurses getting abused, even shopkeepers, And I think the broader point is, where is that anger coming from, and what can we do to try and help that anger be channeled into something good? And some of that anger, I'm sure, is about politics and about the state of the country, and I get that, I totally get that. But how can we do something positive with the way that people are feeling?
You mentioned that somebody had been arrested for sending you an email.
Yeah, there was. I don't want to go into details
Okay.
about it really.
Okay.
What I try not to do is give oxygen to these things,
Right.
because that's often what people want.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing about MPs speaking out about it. Two things really. One, I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me. I have chosen this, kind of. But I have chosen this at some point. MPs have chosen to go into public life. They've chosen to do our jobs. We don't want sympathy. We don't want pity. But I think it's also important that people understand the reality of what it's like to be an MP, or indeed a councillor. Councillors get this as well, or, as I've said, other careers, people in the media, women in public life in a variety of different guises get abuse. But also what I don't want to do is draw attention to the people who do these things, because a big part of this is attention, and then you're doing their job for them, aren't you?
Interesting. Your sister was murdered as she was about to do a constituency surgery. How do you do your constituency surgery? Has it affected the way you do your constituency surgery?
Yeah, I think for lots of MPs, things changed after Jo was killed around engagement with the public. Some MPs still do open surgeries. I don't, and I never will. And actually, people in Batley and Spen fully respect that and understand that. I think, unfortunately, because of what happened to Sir David Amess, maybe other MPs have reviewed it in light of that.
Yes.
But you need to be accessible. And that's the balance, isn't it? That's the fine balance. And I want to be accessible. So we do a lot of, we'll do appointments where people will come to the office, but it's all pre-arranged. We'll do telephone calls. I do quite a lot of phone calls with people. Obviously, you can do a lot by email.
Yeah.
So there are ways of communicating with people. You don't have to do that open surgery. And I kind of get it, where some people will say, well, I want to be accessible to my public and all the rest of it. But then look at what can happen. And let's pray to whoever you pray to that it never happens again. But it's happened twice now. And that, for me, is enough to know that that is not the way of doing this job safely. I also take all the advice and help that I'm given from the police. West Yorkshire Police have been absolutely amazing, extremely supportive of me.
I read that you carry 3 panic alarms with you. This was about a year ago, I think. Is that still? It doesn't seem that safe to me, to be honest.
No,
a panic alarm, but
yeah, I mean, we've got 3 different alarms that we can use for various different things.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, one of those I would suggest I just carry just because I'm a woman. You know, one of those alarms where if anything happens, you just make a lot of noise. But then a couple of others are linked to the police. And it is weird that that's now what my life looks like. But equally, I would rather have them than not have them, because the last thing I want is for my parents or partner or family and friends to get that phone call that, you know, no one should ever have to get.
Absolutely. The by-election that you were a candidate in was pretty toxic.
I've had better 6 weeks.
Yeah, it was quite comfortable to watch, actually.
Yeah.
Do we protect candidates enough?
I think that's the other thing, isn't it? Probably not, but then we shouldn't have to. I think, and the big thing for me about people going into politics, and that was a massive decision for me to put myself forward. It was a very quick decision. Time will tell whether it was proved to be the right decision, but it was. But I didn't anticipate what happening, and that really did sort of, you know, come out of the blue to me. But why would any woman, young woman, someone from an ethnic minority, or anyone actually, want to put themselves in a situation where you are being shouted at in the street, you are getting abuse, you are, you know, people are sending messages about you on WhatsApp groups of which you know nothing about. Why would you want to put yourself forward for that? And also, and that worries me, because how are we going to get good people in public life? We've also seen a number of good people, and I would include your good self in this, step away from public life for various reasons, but safety and that sense of, you know, intrusion in your life is often quoted by people, men and women, but very much so women. Good people across the political spectrum. So, you know, candidates, yes, I think probably should get more protection, but what does that look like? Because again, the reason you want to be a candidate is to go out and meet people and be around people. This job is all about people. That's the bit of it that I really enjoy. So how do you get that balance between making sure those people feel safe, but can also put themselves forward in the way that they want? And I don't have the answers. I wish I did.
But you're going to continue to try and work through so that we get to a point, I don't know if there is such a point, that every member of Parliament feels safe going about.
Yeah, and I do think that is about society, and it's about culture, and it's about understanding, you know, the role of elected officials, but it's also about how we treat fellow human beings. Actually, if we get right down to basics, it's not even about politics, is it? It's about people doing their jobs. And again, whether that's police officers, whether it's doctors, whether it's journalists, whoever it is, that person is a human being, and they're going to go home to their family, and they're going to go home to their friends. And we sometimes dehumanise certain professions, and we dehumanise people depending on maybe what's going on in our own lives. And I just think we've got to really push back against that and say, you know, I'm meeting you as a fellow human being. You've got whatever's going on in your life going on, and I've got to respect that and try and understand that. And I try and do that in Parliament, I try and do that in the constituency, I try and do that in my life. But we sometimes lose sight of that human connection. And without that, you know, what else have we got? Remarkable.
I think you are a remarkable person. I'm so sorry for what you and your family went through. And just to sort of let people know, what you said, I don't seek a high profile. I think I've been trying to get you for about a year to do an interview, so I can absolutely confirm that that's...
I'm actually quite shy. Although my mum and dad would never believe that. But the thing is, I'm not shy, but I am also building my confidence in this new world. And it is a different world. You know that. It is a different world. And I know I'm a good enough person to be in it, but you've got to build your confidence to feel that, you know, your voice and the voices of the people that you represent, you know, need to be heard.
I've loved meeting you. Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.